Encamped along the hills of light, ye Christian soldiers ride, and press the battle ere the night shall fill the glowing sky. Against the broken bells below, let all our strength be hurled. Faith is the victory we know, that overcomes the world. Faith is the victory. Faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. His banner over us is love, our sword, the word of God. We raise them up with shouts of triumph. Rise. They like a whirlwind threat, where all feel the pain by which they conquer death is still our guiding shield. Faith is a victory. Faith is a victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. To him that overcomes the world, my kingdom shall be given. Before the angels he shall know his name confessed in heaven. Then onward from the fields of light, our hearts with love aflame, will vanquish all the hosts of night in Jesus' conquering name. Faith is a victory. Faith is a victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. Hymn number 230. 230. Worthy of praises, Christ our Redeemer, worthy of glory, honor, and power, worthy of all our soul's adoration, worthy art thou, worthy art thou, worthy of riches, blessings, and honor, worthy of wisdom, and power, worthy of earth and endless thanksgiving, worthy art thou, worthy art thou. Lift up the voices and sing devotion, saints of all earth before him should bow. Angels in heaven worship him, saying, worthy art thou, worthy art thou, worthy of earth and blessings and honor, worthy of earth and glory and power, worthy of earth and heaven's thanksgiving, worthy art thou, worthy art thou. Lord, may we come before thee with singing, with thy spirit, wisdom, and power. May we ascribe thee glory and honor. Worthy art thou, worthy art thou, worthy of riches, blessings, and honor, worthy of wisdom, glory, and power, worthy of earth and heaven's thanksgiving, worthy art thou, worthy art thou. I will now. Hymn number 5 is now. I will sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. How he left his home in glory for the cross of Calvary. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the Christian sea. I was lost, but Jesus found me, and the sheep that went astray. Through his loving arms around me, drew me back into his way. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. He will keep me till the river rolls its waters at my feet. Then he'll bear me safely over where the loved ones I shall be. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. Hymn number 915 after the lesson. Hymn number 915.
What was the point? In advance, I'm not chasing tonight. Go ahead. Sir, point.
Oh, boy.
Back to just going to the next one. Finishing up on the Beatitudes. And go ahead, you move. Oh,
Ha, ha.
you did, okay. All right. I think some people just don't like to be pointed out. Or pointed at. So we're down to the persecuted. And there's some things to think about here, and there's a thing there that we need to understand. All the way up to now, and you know, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who hunger, blessed are the... There's a generality there. And he gets there, blessed are those who are persecuted for the righteous' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, there is a condition in there. Notice it doesn't talk about just the persecuted. It said for righteousness' sake. Then we're going to look at it. First of all, I want to think about this because when he actually says that, he goes, blessed are you when they revile you, persecute you, and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Be glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, before we get into the who, I want us to understand that every other beatitude has a generality into it of whoever, basically, is the way it turns into. Even this one has a whoever. But notice, every other one, every single one, is a condition of what a person does. This one is more of what is done because of what you do. It's what others do to you. But it still has that conditional in it. And they use, sometimes we want to think about the Sermon on the Mount, remote context. Who's the you?
The Jews that he's talking to.
The multitude that is sitting there on the mount. The ones that he's preaching to. That's the you. That's who the you applies to. How many times we read in the Bible and go, you must be me? Do we always want you to be me? You ever look at scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, you want that you? I don't want that you. I don't want that you to be me. Now there are things that we have to understand, and so we have to be willing to take things, first of all, and look at the immediate context and discover who that you is there. And that's kind of the first thing we want to look at, because honestly, how many of them that were sitting there listening ever thought about being persecuted for righteousness' sake? None. I like Don's prayer. I think we should be thankful that we're able to come together without fear of persecution. That's really what he's talking about. Well, I'm molested. No fear of persecution. For now. And I do say for now. Well, that worries me sometimes. We look at everything going on around us. We need to be grateful. There's the other flip. If you were sitting there listening to Jesus and said, blessed are you when you're persecuted for righteousness' sake, would you?
Well, they kind of fell into that category too, that they were persecuted, because when he says they persecuted the prophets before you, he's talking about the same group.
Yeah, but he's talking about but also, and he's saying that who were before you, so he's trying to tell them, prophets have been persecuted before, you'll be in the same company of that. But have they been persecuted yet?
Oh yeah, there was all that kind of stuff going on.
Not in that time frame. Not in that first century when Jesus lived. Oh, they had to contend with the Pharisees on, but in the time that Jesus lived, that persecution had not yet begun.
Not intentionally.
Not intentionally. There were the Pharisees that had to deal with it and everything, but how many of them were stoned? How many of their daily lives had to be afraid of what they said?
Sitting on the hillside when he utters these words, very limited.
Very limited. That's that point. That the average person there would be like a person in the United States. If you told them, you need to realize a day is coming that you're going to be persecuted for doing right. How many would sit there and go, yeah, right? In this country. Not right. Other parts of the world, yes, it was going on, but it wasn't in that first century. In that first century, in that time frame when Jesus is speaking, the Jews were living in peace.
Well, except I think what Ron was referring to were the Romans. You know,
Well, but even then, they, as long as they followed Roman rule, they were able to practice Judaism without any interference. It wouldn't be until AD 70 when they started rebelling again that it would become to the destruction of the temple. So we're 40 years away from that. Now, we're not that many years away from there starting to be a position for those that would do right. And it would come from those very same people. That's where he says that. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Who persecuted the prophets?
Jews.
The Jews. So, in fact, verse 23, or chapter 23, at summation of his condemnation of the Pharisees and scribes. Notice, therefore indeed I send you prophets, wise men, scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city. that on you may come the righteous blood shed on the earth from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Micaiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Surely I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. There's an interesting thing. Jesus kind of said there, if you're guilty of shedding the blood of one prophet, you're guilty of shedding the blood of all prophets. Who killed Abel?
Yeah.
Also his brother Cain. How many of the people standing there that day were alive when Abel died? But his point was, you will become guilty. Not only of Abel's blood, but of every prophet right up to Zechariah, the son of Micaiah. So that you, in the immediate context, are the people listening to him that will become Christians. When the apostles are brought in, this is probably verses 39 through 41, before the Sanhedrin, or the council, many of which were of the Sanhedrin, most of which were of the Sanhedrin, along with the high priest. And Gamaliel said, y'all need to leave these guys alone. Because when they called for the apostles, and notice it, and beat them, they commanded that they should not speak in the name of Jesus and let them go. So they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer the shame for his name. And daily in the temple and every house they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as Christ. You think they got the message? These are in part. Sometimes we read that threatened part and we don't get that part about beating. When they had beaten them. What do the Jews do when they beat you?
Some message.
How many stripes do they get?
39.
39 minus 1. Probably 40 minus 1, 39. Okay? So, here's the thing. When you think about it, all 12 of them received that same beating. For doing the very thing that John and Peter had been told not to do in chapter 4. They did it anyway. They put them in prison. God let them out of prison. They go back to preaching. What do they do? Their exact words was, we ought to obey God rather than men. God tells us, preach. You know what they told them? You can beat us. Guess what? We're still going to preach. We're still going to worship. We're still going to do what we know is right. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus talking to the apostles and the other disciples said, behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. How many applications can we make that part to? I like that one, being wise as serpents. Doesn't say be evil as a serpent, it says be as wise. What does the snake do? Huh? Okay, that's snake, but I'm talking about this, what's the nature of snakes. When they feel threatened, what do?
Right.
Huh? Not
Fight.
always.
They hide.
They hide.
Mm.
Sometimes they go into hiding, but they don't give up. They just find another path. But you got to hold that other part, harmless as doves. Let me ask you something. How many disciples that were killed in the Bible ran out and said, "Here, kill me"? Huh? That's why when it talks about them preaching and teaching, where were they preaching and teaching? Synagogues, the temple, the streets. Guess where they weren't preaching and teaching? They didn't go back to that council. They didn't cast their pearls before swine. They weren't looking to get killed. They just said, if we get killed in the process, then that's your will, Lord. And guess what? They said, thank you for being worthy to die for the Lord. And it's not that unusual, and it shouldn't be. Paul would write to the Galatians, have I become your enemy for telling you the truth? The quickest way for somebody to hate you is telling the truth. Quickest way to make somebody mad is tell you the truth.
It is contrary to their life.
If it's contrary to their liking. Even sometimes it may take a while for them to get over it. Y'all don't believe me? Your wife ever asked you, does this dress look okay? Sure not going to go back and say, well, it's a little too tight. It makes you look a little fat, right? Might show it shows your figure. And I don't want other men to see that. Then you get out of trouble. Right? Wording can mean everything, and we need to understand that. And that's what Jesus said, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you're not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep your words also. There's important things that are hard to do sometimes. One of those things is to love those who hate you.
Talked about that this morning.
Yeah. Oh, in Bible class, okay? So, is it easy? You want to know what the key is? I don't know what the answer Dwayne gave you. Stop seeing them as people that hate you and see them as souls that are lost. Right?
That's what Christ did.
That's what Christ did. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. You know what he's saying? That they don't even realize they are condemning themselves to hell. And that's the way we should see people, especially when we get into discussions concerning the truth of the gospel. Because they don't understand, they're throwing away what can save them. No person, no logical person, except, that's not in a panic, because this happens a lot of times. They're drowning. If drowning, throwing a lifeline would kick it away. This has been known to happen with people in panic. They're just fearful, and they're just doing it. And they're not intentionally throwing away the lifeline. But no reasonable person would do that, right? Well, isn't that what the gospel is? A lot of them don't even understand what they're doing. Some do. Even then, they don't fully realize. So now, let's get back from the you to the those. Because what does those do with the you? No, then Peter answered, said to him, see, we have left all and followed you. Therefore, what shall we have? So Jesus said to them, I surely say to you that in the regeneration, when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, you who have followed me will sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses, know that everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my name's sake shall receive 100-fold and inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. You know how good it is when you're always last and get to be first. Have a name like Woodard.
Mm-hmm.
I remember on graduation night, this one girl that was always behind me, Jim would sit there and go, after this is the last time I have to line up behind you. And I said, is it that bad? She goes, no, I'm just thinking it won't happen anymore. Because in every class that we were in together, she always came after me. One time I got to be first. And that was called they had, on Alex's senior night band, they handed the teacher, they got us all lined up in reverse, so those that first, the alphabet go first, would all be lined up correctly. Well, they handed the athletic director the same paper, and it was lasted that same way, so he started calling off from the top to the bottom. And we got to go first. And I was happy. I'm like, wow, okay. I waited for a minute because I surely realized he's doing it wrong, but he kept calling out the name, so we came out. And this woman who was in the position of being the booster band president, her head was so in it. I got the dirtiest look from that woman, and I just had to laugh. Jesus talked about people that think they're going to be saved that'll end up being discounted. And some that later are called might even be greater than some of those that were called early. We get into those. Think about all those things. Blessed are this. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after it. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. So that takes the general thing that he gives, the specific thing, and turns it into those. Any of those are the same as the you. So it applies. Notice it. Bless those who persecute, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peacefully with all men. Now, I want you to understand something about the those in these contexts. Who was any of Paul's epistles written to? People of what time? Of what time were the people who was Paul's epistles written to? Of what time was it? Who did he write them to?
The Gentiles.
Christian
The
generation.
churches.
Christian churches, okay? Of what century? First century. Okay? So people are, well, that wasn't written to us. What did Romans 15:4 say? Anybody think? Things written beforehand were written for our learning. Okay? What does that do for us in the New Testament? It wasn't written to us, but it was written for us. And when we go to make applications and we can see some things that the you doesn't apply to us, we can also find those things that apply to all Christians for all time. Know that. Who does that not apply to? See, there comes those. When Jesus says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, that's whoever. For whenever. And then when he turns it to the audience and say, blessed are you, point out to them, that you becomes part of the those. So if you're one of the those, you become one of the you.
Whatever you're clearing up just got real fuzzy.
Okay? If you're being persecuted for righteousness' sake, are you blessed? Are you one of those people that are being persecuted for righteousness' sake? Blessed are those. In our vehicular, we would say those people who. Right? Now, if he turns and said, blessed are you when they persecute you, say all manners of lies in you, do all these things in my name's sake, because so did they the prophets before you. When you take that they and apply it to those doing the persecuting, and understand that everyone that kills a prophet is guilty of all prophets, those that killed Stephen were just as guilty of killing Abel. The ones that killed Paul were just as guilty of killing Abel. The ones that tried to kill Paul, in those various stonings in various ways, were just as guilty. And we end up being persecuted for righteousness' sake. We now are part of them, those people. Does that make better sense? We have become a part of those people. So when we receive those following verses, we're in that same company.
Would it be similar to the act that our sin crucified Christ?
Yeah, very similar, because just, were we there? No. Had we lived yet? But did God know that we would sin? Was his blood shed for our sin? Was his blood shed because of our sin? Just as much as he was because of Cain's sin. Because of Adam and Eve's sin. So that's a very good point into it. So sometimes we have to look at that, because people will say, well, this you isn't you. Well, no, right there and then he's not talking about me. But when I become that person, then what follows applies to me as well. Just as this point of understanding that we are to bless them. That comes back to loving that neighbor who hates you. You know what? What did Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount? Love your enemies. When he says what? You've heard it said to love your neighbor and hate your enemies. He said, nope. I watched a movie one time where a guy ends up shooting a guy that's shooting at him, and he goes, look at what you made me do. And he starts, do you understand this isn't a game? What's he mad at? He didn't want to take a life, but he'd been put in a position where he had to take a life. He didn't hate that man. He regretted killing that man. Here's the reality that we get into as Christians. When we see somebody who's given up their soul, it should not be, well, they bringing hell upon themselves. No. No. It should be pity for them. We should hate that it's getting to the point that we can't discuss it with them. Because we know it's a soul. And I like this part. If it is possible, as much as it depends on you, live peacefully with all men. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people today, and among that, a lot of preachers that haven't learned that it's not a badge of honor to go and cause problems. we go from one extreme to saying, well, if they don't get forthright and offensive with the gospel, they're not standing up for the truth. But what did Paul say? Joey, you know what he said. What did he say about our speech? Let it be seasoned with salt. What does that mean?
Well, it means if we don't know how to approach someone, we need to pray about it, think about it, meditate about it, and then approach them.
Yeah.
Be careful in how we talk to people.
Yeah, the approach, how we talk to people. It may become necessary that they get offended, but as Brian King said, let it be the gospel that offends them. Don't let it be our attitude. Don't let it be our presentation that we didn't go out seeking to be offended. I know some preachers that like to move every 3 years. I'm not one of them. I got over moving as a kid. They don't want to do so long different. I hate moving. I don't consider it a badge of honor. I think there's a problem there when you constantly are getting fired and having to move. And you can say, well, it's caused my preaching. Yeah, it probably is. But it's probably not what you're preaching, it's how you preach it. That's seasoned with salt. You can stand for the truth without stepping on people's heads. You'll step on their toes. There's a difference between stepping on somebody's toe and kicking them in the head. That's where that comes in, as much as possible. As much as depends on you. If it's going to be a problem, let it be their problem. And we're going backwards. I want you to understand something. When we take those and look at and I started at the persecuted, we need to understand how this all builds. Those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake are the peacemakers. And the peacemakers are the pure in heart. And the pure in heart are the merciful. And the merciful are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. And those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are the meek. And the meek are those who mourn, and those who mourn are the poor in spirit. So we should be building each one of these. If we recognize one of these that I'm not one of them, guess what? I need to fix that. And when Jesus used this terminology, it's not just that particular group. It's whoever, whenever, forever. And then there's the condition, righteousness' sake. It didn't say just to be right, it said for righteousness' sake. Paul writes, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation. Everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and also for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, that it's written, the just shall live by faith. Now take that point and recognize the point of the gospel. You can't know the righteousness of God without knowing the gospel. And that's not just Jesus coming on this earth and living as a man, living sinless, being crucified and being resurrected. That's all the teachings that go with it. That's the entirety of it. And so what is it they're being persecuted for? For living by the gospel. For righteousness' sake. For permeating the gospel. For passing it on. For trying to practice it as Joey said, be in that living sermon this morning.
Well, the Jews knew that God was righteous, but they didn't realize that righteousness came in through the gospel.
Guess what? Even though the Jews, that applied to the Jews, but how many people that apply today that want Christianity without the gospel? They realize God's righteous, but they don't want to be righteous. They just want to be saved. It's just like those guys that like that badge get fired every time. Well, they think I'm being persecuted because I'm preaching in righteousness. I'm already acting righteous.
It's like freedom without the Constitution.
Yeah. You can't have it. You can't, it's like freedom without having any kind of system of law. That's just chaos. Well, that's the same thing with the gospel. If you want Christianity without the gospel, without the terms and the conditions that are part of it, what it means to live righteous in the eyes of God, guess what you have now? Chaos.
Reward without responsibility.
Well, yeah, which will never happen. Here comes back the point. Ron's right, reward without responsibility. That doesn't happen. It's like trying to win the lottery without buying a ticket. So I'm not advocating go buy lottery tickets. I'm just saying it's not going to happen.
Something for nothing.
Something for nothing. No such thing as a free lunch. We say salvation is free. How free was it for Christ? And Paul would turn around and say, we were bought with a price. We have obligations. And that's what we should realize. This hit me this week. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despised the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. You have not yet resisted the bloodshed, striving against sin. Y'all want to know what hit me this week? That last verse. Verses 3 and 4. That last sentence of verse 3, or last phrase. Verse 4. He says, how many of you have died trying to live righteous? How many of you have been murdered trying to live righteous? That's what the Hebrew writers point out. You're still alive. You haven't suffered for Christ yet. Think about it. Consider him. Consider Christ who endured the hostility from sinners against himself. So when you're feeling weary and discouraged, you don't have everybody trying to kill you yet. No, you have not yet resisted the bloodshed. It can happen. For some of you, it will happen. So when you think being a Christian is too hard, how hard was it for Christ to be faithful? Don't discount the Garden of Gethsemane. Those 3 hours of praying, of struggling, knowing the death that awaited him. And never ever say it was easy for him. Because it wasn't. Or scholars say, you don't understand. That's what the writer, don't ever think that you don't understand, that God doesn't understand. And Peter puts it this way, beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you as though some strange thing happened to you. But rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. Oh, how many of us will go, well, Peter, you saw him. That sounds easy for you. Was it easy for Peter? Was Peter a man who loved life? In the night of betrayal, what made him betray the Lord? Pride of life. Fear of dying. Fear, not so much of dying, fear of that cross. Fear of that death. Peter was willing to go down swinging, but crucifixion wasn't going down swinging.
Why do you think we encounter such little persecution today?
We're too blessed. God at times blesses us to a point that it will separate the truly faithful from the mediocre faithful. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I can remember a period of time in the life of this congregation when we had a significant amount of at least verbal persecution. We had developed a debate between the largest congregation of people in town and the Church of Christ. We held to it. And it was a kind of a knockdown, drag out, if you understand what I'm talking about. For a number of months thereafter, there was sordid times, but not anything violent, but definitely more.
Yeah, you didn't walk down the street
Right. And somebody.
without hearing somebody say something.
Right. Run into that. But otherwise, we live a fairly peaceful life. Thank you, Lord.
Yeah.
Maybe he knows we don't can't,
Maybe you realize we may not necessarily be able to handle it. You know, that there's a point there that we have to make up our mind. Peter reminded that if you are reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are you, for the Spirit of glory of God rests upon you. On their part he is blasphemed, but on your part he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, an evildoer, as a busybody in other matters, other people's matters. If anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, let him glorify God in this matter. Know that for the time has come for judgment to begin at the house of God. It begins with us first. What will be the end of those who do not obey the gospel of God? Now, if the righteous one is scarcely saved, where will the ungodly and sinner appear? Therefore, let those who suffer according to the will of God commit their souls to him in doing good as to a faithful creator. What's our greatest enemy? And don't say the devil.
Complacency.
Nailed it. Complacency. That's the hardest part of not suffering person. It's easy to become complacent.
And that might be why the devil's leaving us alone.
Might be. Even the devil probably learned a few things from the great persecution. But is he leaving us completely alone? Or is it that we just don't see it?
He's the snake in hiding.
It's a snake in hiding.
He's gonna let us put our foot in the noose and
But not our own self.
See, that's the thing. If you look at this country, really look at this country, and you think Christianity is not under attack, and understand this, it's kind of like when Judaism was under attack. Real Christianity, serving God, was also under attack. So the reality is, when we see people in so-called Christendom being attacked, guess what's happening to the church? It's being attacked. It might be in small degrees, but it's still there. Ron?
As far as persecution of the church, I've never heard one denomination say anything against another denominational person. But if you mention that you are Church of Christ, you can see the wheels turning. The whip doesn't come out, but you can see the wheels turning. Oh, you guys.
I got two old high school friends that I figured out on Facebook because of some of those things that I've said on Thursday morning. One of them unfriended me, if you know what that is, on Facebook. And I was trying to figure out, and I said something to one of them one day, and the three of us used to ride to college together when I first went to college. And he said, me and him were talking about you the other day. I said, I hope it was all good. And he said, some of it.
Mhm.
And it wasn't a joke. One of them's a Baptist, one of them's a Methodist. Guess who you offend when you start preaching the truth? Both of them. The enemy of my enemy is my enemy, is my friend. That's what happened. That's what Ron was talking about. They won't necessarily say something. Occasionally they'll get into a debate, whatever. I remember one little preacher of the Baptist Sword, we were into a talk and everything, and he was talking about that you didn't have to be baptized and everything. And I said, well, if it didn't, and I know in his belief, I said, well, if it doesn't matter if you're baptized, why does it matter how you're baptized? He looked at me and I pointed him after, why don't you just sprinkle or immerse like they did? Just pick whatever's of your choosing. He goes, now that's not biblical.
Mhm.
My next response was, we're going to get into what biblical, you got a problem. You're holding to this because it's biblical, but you won't hold to this that it's necessity. And it's biblical that it's necessity. They won't always not say anything about the other. They just won't say it to them. Occasionally they'll say it. But at the same time, he would never, ever tell me that those people were lost. Because in their mind, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you just believe. Until you say, and you're okay with them until you say, yes, it matters. And it does matter.
Well, Michael Shepherd, I know you know Michael Shepherd. He said, he came to the Kinder Church of Christ one day and he said, Christ died for the church. It's his church. He bought and paid for it with his blood. Why not just call it his church?
Why not call it his church?
It makes sense. It makes all the sense in the world.
It does. It makes all the sense. I've heard Michael. Is he still in Pensacola? But it comes back to that point. You have to understand, and you know, basically in a nutshell, what Thomas Campbell was trying to get across was, let's do biblical things biblically. Use it as a guide. One last point. Blessed are the persecuted. I want you to notice this. This goes through all of them. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They are called the sons of God. They will see God in glory. They will obtain mercy. They will be filled with mercy, righteousness. They will inherit the earth. They will be comforted. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's all the results of those blessed beatitudes. And I went from top to bottom because Because I want you to understand, it starts with, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, and it ends, blessed are the persecuted, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It comes back to building all that up to understand that if we're living those Beatitudes, as much as we say Beatitudes, it's one attitude. Be right with God.
Not feel like it, be it.
Be it. Be it. Don't think, know it. I asked somebody one time, they said, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? I said, I know he is. And they said, what? I said, do you believe it? Yeah. Do you know it? He said, well, I believe it. I can't. I said, I know it. That's what we're supposed to get to. We're supposed to get to that point where we know. Our faith isn't just a mere belief, but that we know. We know it. And there's no doubt in our mind whatsoever. And that's where this attitude comes into. We are to be those people. And the result will be that we'll be received by God as those people, as his children. Let's stand and sing.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. When we do his good will, he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the sky, but its light quickly drives it away. Not a doubt nor a fear, not a sigh nor a tear, can abide while we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Then in fellowship sweet, we will sit at his feet, or will walk by his side in the way. What he says we will do, where he sends we will go, never fear.